So, Ravi, how are things looking for 2021 so far? Starting out the right way?
Exciting.
Yeah. So, do you think 20? I've been talking to a number of people, and 2020 was kind of a reset year. Would you chalk it up to a reset?
It was a chance to, I guess you could say react. It was a chance to do things in different ways. Let's put it that way.
How do you think for you at Zip Slip things were changed, or how were things done a little differently than what you had seen before?
Yeah. Well, what we saw was were customers that were obviously in a state of chaos. So cutting through that was the first challenge. And when we managed to do that, we offered solutions that helped them with that chaos they were dealing with, right?
So, we've kind of started a conversation here, really just from a thread, and we probably bring it back to the technology and the data in a little bit here. But how did they? Was it reactive? They were in chaos type situation, or you kind of saw it happening? How did that all occur? How did that evolve?
So these are school communities and other organizations, and suddenly they saw that everything changed, right? So nothing is on site. They had to deal with people remotely, not only the staff but also their constituents, meaning parents, students, other members of the community. So it was a dramatically different, thing, and it happened very suddenly, as you know, right? As everybody knows. So there were some tools out there they started to use, like Zoom, obviously, but there was a lot left undone because it exposed a lot of weaknesses in the communications infrastructure they had. How do they engage with their community? How do they keep them informed? How do they collect information? All of those problems were exposed because before that they could be, kind of lackadaisical about it, lax at least, in terms of how that was done. It didn't matter as much. But in the new era, the COVID era, it was kind of unforgiving. They had to improve. So that was the opportunity, really.
Agreed. Well, so it looks like we've got a couple of people who've joined in on LinkedIn. I would ask that anybody who joins in on LinkedIn, please introduce yourself in the chat and just tell us who you are and where you're from, and if there's specific things that you're looking for. I'd love to hear from you, because we're going to start our conversation with Ravi in just a second here. So first of all, hey, Ravi, let's go out and get ourselves started. Hey, nice to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. We were just talking about some of the communities that you work with, and kind of how it seems like things just kind of came out of left field. All of a sudden, processes and procedures and things that they had just broke.
Yeah.
And everyone was scrambling all of a sudden to figure out where was the ground and what is right side up. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. First, it really was a shock. So the organizations were, just in turmoil, right? And it wasn't like they weren't reacting. It was they just couldn't react. They didn't know what to do. So they were the first week or two was sort of frozen in fear, frozen in place, and then things started to come together. But really, the whole COVID situation exposed all the weaknesses that were there, or that had been built up, right? And it was an opportunity for the communities, the schools, and other organizations to really fix things, to move forward in a different way. And I hope and I think at least some of them is going to come out of this with better methodologies, better systems, better ways to communicate with the community. There's lots of improvements, I think, that are happening.
So, Ravi, I want to give everyone who's in on LinkedIn just a little bit of background as to who you are. I mean, I've known you for quite some time now. I've had the opportunity to work with you before, which has been nice. I've always thought of you as just a technologist who kind of gets how all the parts and pieces fit together. Truly an engineer. And you've been chief technology officer for a number of companies. You've worked with large enterprises that were multinational. You've worked with enterprises in companies that worked with small businesses. Can you talk a little more about kind of sort of the varied background that you've had? I mean, it's always been in and around technology and processes and systems. Can you give a little more flavor around that?
Sure thing. So let me first start with how we kind of got to know each other, because we have sort of a common circle of friends. And quite frankly, they're older people, by the way. They're my age. But a lot of them are frankly not that exciting. so whenever I spoke with Vinay, it was always fun, because it was about entrepreneurship. It was something interesting. And we both have a common love of cars. And Vinay, I think actually you're racing around a bit, like actually racing cars. But I know in my past I was fixing cars, doing other things like that. So were you, I think. Anyway, we had lots of stuff to talk about. That's how we got to know each other, as you know. But to answer your question, yeah, my background's in technology. It's a lot of different kinds of technology. I started a long time back, 35, 40 years ago, in telecom systems, old style telecom. The great thing about technology is that anything you do is obsolete in 2 years. So everything changes every few years and you have to keep up. There's always something exciting. I've worked for large companies, but most exciting stuff are startups that I've done, co-founded or what have you. There's 3 or 4 startups. And they're an adrenaline rush. And there's just a lot of work, a lot of exciting stuff that can be done. And there's always issues or problems that can be solved. Value you can show is no different now. There's just so many things that can be done to help businesses improve their business, or communities to improve their communities. There's just a lot that can be done.
So the title of our conversation was technology and data for the smaller company, and specifically around pest control, and just how this idea that, well, I want to kind of start with this kind of concept, and I want to try it on and see how you feel about this. There's 10,000 pieces of software out there. There's so much out there, and every place you go, everyone is saying, I can solve this for you. And software is ultimately a productivity tool. Some of it just sucks. Why is that? Why do you think that that from all the time you worked in and around technology and software, why is some of it just a waste of your time?
Right. I don't know the exact reason, but I think a couple of things I can think about. One is that I think pretty much everybody's watching, successful businesses in the stock market. Most often those companies are focused on large enterprises. They want to solve, big and lucrative problems, right? Now, some of them are actually pretty good at addressing the smaller business, but that's one factor, that there's a tremendous amount of energy being put in, by companies in solving problems for bigger companies, which just makes the bigger companies even stronger. The whole notion of winner take all is pretty common. It's well known, but I think there's a second order effect where bigger companies just get better more quickly because they have more resources in place, and they can customize things as they see fit. There's just more they can do, right? So that's the first point. I think the other point is that frankly, people don't know what's out there, right? Sometimes choices in technology are made ad hoc, or maybe looking for a single point solution rather than trying to figure out, where do I want to be in a couple of years? What problems do I want to solve? And having some kind of a strategy in place and a plan in place to get there.
So I think a little bit of what I'm hearing here is that I think a lot of smaller companies don't have the benefit of doing gigantic analysis like some of the larger enterprises who can have 40 people sit at a table and assess something, right? Mm-hmm. It's the owner, it's maybe the operations VP or someone within the company who's got to take a look at something.
Yeah.
How should a smaller company, I mean, I think smaller companies are constantly looking at, I need to fix this problem right now. And sometimes I think that happens as a Band-Aid. How should smaller companies take a look at that? How can they make that process a little bit better for themselves in terms of thinking about that technology and the data?
Yeah. So you're right. One of the key problem is that typically smaller companies don't have dedicated people or sophisticated sort of, people that have worked in technology a long time, right? The IT group or whatever. And, I remember selling to big companies like Verizon or whatever, and they'd have scores of people that would analyze what you had to offer, and you had to go through this gauntlet of, you know, all kinds of questions, testing, whatever. It was like a multi-year process before you could, get them to agree on anything. It was pretty difficult, but smaller businesses don't operate that way, cannot operate that way. Frankly, they need to sit down, I think, and just figure out, okay, what's my strategy for the next year, next 2 years, next 3 years? If the business is not growing, well, why is it not growing? What's missing? Am I interacting with customers in the right way? Are my employees interacting with the customers in the right way? And then, of course, there's the whole sales and marketing problem. Let's leave that outside of this discussion. But a key issue is: are my employees effective? Are they dealing with the customers in the right way? We see a lot of gaps there, right? So I think you want to look at the organization to see how effective they are in each of their roles. Are the employees doing things the way they should be doing? With customers, are we interacting with customers in the right way? And secondly, are we collecting the information on that, trying to figure out where are the holes, what's happening with this problem, how do we fix it? So it's a series of questions you've got to ask yourself to figure out, what's not working, and then you start looking for solutions. I wouldn't jump directly into the solutions.
So, I will tell you, when I've had a problem, the first thing I always did is I need to just solve that outcome. I got to get that better. But what I think I'm hearing from you a little bit here is, hey, maybe it might be worthwhile just kind of taking a step back a little bit from that situation and saying, hold on, I want to solve that problem too. But there's a larger set of problems that could start to occur. I mean, that's kind of getting a little bit to more of the strategic kind of thinking, though, right? And that's sometimes when you're fighting fires all the time, you don't necessarily have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, the interesting thing is we see small businesses that grow pretty quickly. Some of them grow incredibly quickly. And you got to ask yourself, well, why? What is it that they're doing that's working, right? It's not just about having the resources available. They build up the business to acquire more resources, right? And of course, there could be investors, who knows? But quite often you'll see, the smaller business being successful because operationally they're just better. Obviously, that's a key thing. So asking yourself, what is it that somebody else is doing that could be working, or what am I missing? Those are the kinds of questions that need to be figured out, I think.
So,
by the way, I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
Whenever, as somebody who runs a business, whenever I get frustrated, like something's not working, or maybe we're not selling as much as we should, or whatever, I keep telling myself, stop whining, because there are other people that are making things work. So don't fall into that trap, right? So I remind myself that there's always a path to, a better organization, a better operation.
So, I had a conversation with someone once, and they kind of pressed me on this. I said, small businesses, or small and medium-sized businesses, are challenged because they don't have all the resources that the large companies do. And that person just kind of kept pressing me, saying, why do you believe that? Because all big companies were small at some point. They hire, for the most part, from the exact same talent pool. It's not like they get to go to some secret meeting that they get to hire people from. Cash. They started small and they only had a certain amount of cash at some point in time, and they grew over time. It depends on how fast. So really, those three things are what are sort of the three legs of the stool for a company.
Yeah. Unless you bring in some savior investor that throws a lot of money at you, which can have its own problems, by the way.
Right.
There are plenty of businesses, obviously, that have succeeded and grown spectacularly. Right?
Yep.
In fact, they're the ones we kind of look at. It's a success bias, right? Yeah.
So the only thing that really then separates them is really just the process by which they grow, right? It's the maturity of that process. Talk to me about that in terms of technology and helping process and building process, because that's really what's going to set you apart. That's going to be your superpower, I think, at the end of the day, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And, if you had a blank slate, you could start with, oh, here's the perfect, model, or here's the perfect way to run a business, but nobody has a blank slate. So what we see when we look at an organization, when we start talking to them, is that there's a mess of different applications solving different pieces of the puzzle. And, one part of the organization is working using like 2 or 3 tools, another part, maybe another tool, and they're not talking to each other. And the finance person or the CEO or, the business owner, whoever, he's not seeing the big picture effectively, because you have these different pieces of the puzzle stay separate. The puzzle's not, brought together, right? So the reality is that you have businesses that have 2, 3, 4, 5 different applications, and they may not be talking to each other. That's the first problem. The second problem, I think, is there's still gaps. There's still gaps. Are there enough customer touch points? Are you dealing with employees efficiently? If you want to grow, if we want to add a lot more employees, well, you got to make sure you're efficient in how you're training them and how you're communicating with them and how you're reacting to issues that pop up. Also, are you measuring how well they're performing with the customers? All those, yeah, go ahead.
So I want to chime in on that, right? Because I think, talking in theory is nice, but you just touched on something that I hear from a lot of people is a royal pain in the backside, and that is employees, just managing employees. How do you solve an employee problem? How can you approach solving that with data technology? Is that something that's solvable with data or technology?
I don't think there's a perfect solution for anything, but I think certainly what we're seeing is people lack the data. They're not collecting the data. And secondly, even if they had it, they're not necessarily making the best use of it. They're not, maybe there's some few pieces missing. I keep going back to how employees are interacting with customers. That's kind of fundamental, right? So if you're not collecting information on that and measuring that performance, there's something missing. And of course, connecting directly with customers, don't always go through the employees, but are there other touch points with the customers, making sure that, they're happy and they're going to provide you referrals and help you grow.
So maybe to give some more context, and I think this might help those who are on kind of line watching here. Can you tell people a little more about what you do at ZipSlip? I think that maybe that might make the connection, kind of why I thought you and I should have a conversation in front of folks. What do you do at ZipSlip?
So we are a communications platform, and we serve different kinds of organizations, including schools, senior living, assisted living, community organizations, any organization where you have administrators, leaders, and so on dealing with small and large communities. Some of these are very large communities. We're also starting to provide solutions for small businesses, as you know, right? Which is one of the reasons you invited me. And the purpose of the platform is to integrate and dramatically improve the way the business communicates with their employees or their staff and their community, the community they're serving, right? What we see, and that's common across a lot of these organizations, is there's like 2 or 3 or 4 different ways they're connecting with the community, and there's still gaps. There's still gaps. They're not collecting the information they need to. They're not interacting with those folks and letting them feed information back to the organization. So there's all kinds of gaps in the way they're, dealing with employees and the community.
So I want to, you've used that word gaps a couple of times. I want to kind of drill in on that and tell you what I think I'm understanding. I would love for anybody else who wants clarification here on LinkedIn or elsewhere to jump in. And if you've got some questions, please chime in and ask us some questions. But I'm hearing the word gaps, and what I'm hearing from you is this idea of, I always think in terms of insights, right? I've got data telling me here's kind of what the truth is, and here's sort of the real truth, and here's what my systems are telling me. And that's the gap that you're talking about, is connecting what's really happening with what happened.
Yeah. I think uh, there's certainly a problem with uh, integrating that information and providing, a visualization and analytics around that or insights around that, right? Which is what Carmo is focused on. There's also a problem, I think, in collecting the information effectively. There's also gaps there, right? So are you, for example, doing some simple surveys with customers after a job is finished, right? Or are you interacting with the customer before a job to make sure they're aware of what's going to happen and give them a chance to, you know, react to what's going to happen? Similarly with employees. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, so let's talk about that. I mean, in terms of some of the forms that you could create and ways to capture information. So I go see a customer, I may have a work order management system, service management system that'll tell me a little bit about what's happening for that particular service or that particular job that I'm doing for someone. Where can I connect, or where do you think that there's opportunities to get more information about that customer that can help me build a better experience for that customer? I mean, because that's ultimately what it's about, right? My customers coming back to me again and again and again, right?
So let's say it's something like pest control. And this is going to be a little different for every kind of business, obviously, right? But something specific like pest control, I would think there's an opportunity before and after, right? Because quite often the customer may not even see the technician that shows up, but give the customer an opportunity to tell you what's on their mind before. It could be the day before, it could be an hour before, or both. And that could be a simple, do you have any issues? You have a very simple web-based survey on a smartphone that they could react to from a text message. Secondly, after the job, you obviously tell them, hey, we finished the application. Here's what we found. Here's some issues to think about, whatever the case might be. Give them an opportunity to rate you, obviously, right? So those are very simple touch points with customers. And why not even add a referral link? Refer us to your neighbor, etc. Right? So there's all kinds of things that can be done there.
I mean, I've always been told I love the whole Staples easy button, right? Just the concept of, I don't have to think about it. I just need to touch the button and it's taken care of for me. So if there's a way to use the data and the technology and ultimately the data to make it just easy for your customer to say, hey, oh, by the way, since you're coming out, I just need to click the button to say, yeah, I wanted you to do this too, because I heard my neighbor was getting that. Can you take care of that for me? Just make it easy peasy to make that decision point just not even a 30-second, a half a second sort of action, right?
Yeah. And it needs to be super easy, but believe me, when customers see you making that effort and making that experience kind of delightful, that's a great way to grow the business. Obviously, there's lots of other things that need to be done. But I go back to my comments on employees. Are you doing enough to make sure that the employees are interacting with customers in the right way, right? There's problems to be, and there are obviously apps out there that businesses use with employees, Pest Routes and other apps. But there's still gaps, I believe.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of business owners is just this idea of trying to keep up with what my employees are doing. I mean, lots of times it's kind of trying to reactively check in on employees just to find out what they're doing. I think there's an opportunity to shift that from being just constantly following them to kind of getting them to lead. And there's a shift in culture that's got to occur. But technology and data could potentially make it, there's an opportunity to make that shift occur using that information, right?
Absolutely. And I think another interesting issue is, in any company, you're going to have the top 10% just be a lot better than the rest, right? How do you get the others to do that, to get to that level? Or, I mean, there's different ways you can attack that problem, but you see, that's I think another area that can be, looked at.
So let's talk about that. So, I mean, just on the employee side, if we want to create more engagement with our employees, lots of times it's just about setting expectations with them in terms of, here's how you did last week, or how did you how did you feel about last week? Because just kind of asking them that sort of question can make a big difference because people know that you care.
Mhm.
How would you put that into a form? How could you gather that so that that's something that helps you build some better decisions? How do you think about that at a high level? What someone
Yeah.
can do?
So first, I think there's there's sort of regular, let's call them surveys, but questionnaires or what have you that could be sent to employees, and you want to obviously have them engaged. But I think you can sort of keep tabs on, you know, how they're perceiving the job and how things are going. Also, you'll be able to assess their personality profiles, and you know, you'll know their strengths and weaknesses. Second, I think really figuring out how they're interacting with customers. So, is the current application you're doing giving the employee the right sort of set of tools, questions, or what have you, to ask him about what happened with that customer interaction? And is he using it at the right time? Is it a timely sort of input of data, let's call it that, right? You know, he just finished the job, that's when he should be doing it, right? So, you know, solving those problems are kind of tricky because you have that time problem, you have to make sure that he's there. There's, you know, there's several issues there, and that can be done though, you know that, right? So,
Yeah, because I mean, what we do, I mean, is try to tie all that information together. You're saying that there's now an opportunity, and this is what you all do, is this idea of bringing more data to the table so you can kind of weave the whole story together.
yeah,
Because if I mean, if nobody wants to read a book where you're missing 6 chapters in the middle, and because that's important information, and you have the capability to start to capture that, so you have a better understanding what I call the ground truth, that what's really happening on the ground.
right. And you know, I think that just what's perceived as potentially small improvements in the operation, you know, the customer touch points, the how the employees are interacting with the customers, and small changes in the employee's behavior, that can multiply. That can multiply in a big way over a few weeks and a few months. Right?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
And when you look at successful organizations that are growing, well, they are doing things along those lines. They are paying attention to those kinds of details.
Yeah, I've heard many times before, and I think even I've tried to do this in companies that I've worked at when I've had people that I'm managing. It's just this idea that just kind of going to them and saying, "Thank you for a job well done," or just "thank you," and it goes a long way. And being able to see if they give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down for that week, you know, how did the week go? Say, hey, you had a tough week. What happened? Just asking, just kind of caring could make all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
And that's sounds easy peasy to do from a technology point of view, but it means a whole hell of a lot to that employee, right? And
Yeah.
that can make all the difference in the
And
world.
then, you know, assuming that, you know, you want to grow that business from say 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 or 200, you still have to keep doing those things, but it has to be efficient, scalable. You know, it has to be done in a way that you can keep doing them. You can't just have that small business mentality. You know, that's like a small business that cares mentality that doesn't grow as well, right? It needs to work in a larger scale.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny that I think a lot of times I used to think myself that, all right, I've hit this next level. I'm done with that issue. I'll never see it again. Actually, I'll revisit it. It'll just be a much bigger issue next time,
Yeah,
and it'll be
yeah,
slightly different in terms of the way it works.
yeah. And you know, the fact is now we have more tools at our disposal than ever before, and everybody has a smartphone, customers included. You know, in our house, I always have my smartphone with me. I use that much more than I use my PC or my Mac. So you can reach people much more easily now than even just 5 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So I think and that includes employees, not just customers. I'm just saying that there's opportunities now to really make that business, your business, much more efficient. If you keep that in mind, keep that mobile smartphone, you know, in the hands of somebody in mind when you make those kinds of decisions.
With what you all do at ZipSlip, do you all have the capability of using mobile phones and rendering all that information on whatever device they have?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what they're going to use. They could use a browser on a smartphone. They could use browser on a Mac, PC, whatever, or our apps. You can use our apps as well. You know, in the business model, we don't expect customers of a pest company to use an app. I don't expect that, although it can be done, I suppose. But you can certainly expect them to click a link in a text message, takes them to a browser, and interact that way in a very clean manner. You can get responses in 5 seconds. I tell you, with ZipSlip, we have experience now. We can send out like a COVID tracking survey or, you know, something like that. You know, let's say we send it out at 8 a.m. We will get thousands of responses from the community within 10, 15 minutes. And it's amazing how fast the responses come in, right? So this is because in this day and age, people are sort of trained to pay attention to things on their smartphone if you do it right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Honestly, you don't want to bug the customer, or the employee, but you know, if you do it right, there's some really interesting opportunities, I think.
Well, I always like to think of it in terms of, I mean, if you kind of understand what their real pain is, sort of what their real, I mean, actually deeper than the pain is really kind of the feeling, right? What is the emotion there?
Yeah.
I mean, a customer always wants to know that they're making the right choice. Right?
That's a great point.
Right.
That's a great point. Yeah, you know, are you keeping the customers safe? Are you keeping them, keeping the bad stuff at bay? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff there, right? And obviously, the business owner is going to know much better how to sort of communicate that, I think. But that's a very important point. Yeah.
But I mean, if you start to translate that in terms of employee, just kind of being able to tell them on a weekly basis, this is how you've done. You know, this is how your week went. You feel like you had a less than par week. Well, because you gave us a thumbs down. Well, look at how you did this week compared to last week. I mean, you can tie it together and say it's not just a guess.
Yeah.
You actually had a slower week, right?
No. Yeah, and you know this with you know, collecting and leveraging the data, that can be done in a very efficient manner, right? So you can get data from multiple sources. We know that businesses have multiple applications, but we can combine them and derive all kinds of interesting insights, right? So additional data from customers, interesting data from employees, and also obviously from the business side of things, and combining all of that to give the business owner a dashboard or dashboards and help them grow more efficiently. And that can include things like, you know, are we really satisfying the customer? Are we exceeding their expectations? You know, there's all kinds of things that can be done there.
So Ravi, tell me a little more about how, if someone is interested in doing some work with you in learning how they can start to collect more data through forms. Do you all do custom work? Is it kind of off the shelf? How does that all work with ZipSlip?
We have a very flexible system, and that allows us to, I don't want to say customize, because it's really configuration. So for example, we can build whatever forms that are needed, whatever sort of notification, notification streams triggered on whatever events. So there's workflows and notifications that they can be built very, very easily. We obviously have some packaged approaches that we can offer as well. So it is, you know, we go back to that democratizing this kind of technology, right? A bigger company would have the resources and time to bring somebody in and truly write software and customize things. But a smaller company will not. But if the tool is very flexible, you know, you can get a really evolved sort of experience, right? That can be delivered to the customer, to employees, and so on. So yeah, we have a lot of experience with this. So we're very comfortable in the area and how to connect with folks in the community, you know, in different ways, whether it's electronic forums, messages, videos, It's multimedia and multiple languages as well, by the way. That's something we're also very used to.
So let me repeat back what I just heard from you is basically there's a series of tools that you guys have on the shelf, and somebody kind of comes to, it's not customization because the tools that you use are similar every time. It's just how you assemble the tools together to kind of get to that end. So someone can come to you and say, hey, look, I need a form to ask them these 3 questions. Then it sends a message from the owner, a little video from the owner saying, thank you very much for answering that survey. And it's a customized sort of
Exactly.
response to that, right? That you've got all those tools already. It's just a matter of packaging them all together is really what you need to answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And as you asked, yeah, it can be supported on browsers. It can be supported on apps. So for example, we have an app that staff can use that allows the organization to communicate efficiently to those people. That includes things like training content. So you can send out training videos, or weekly surveys or what have you, right? There's lots you can do with it.
So if someone kind of comes in the door, I always like to ask people, what do they consider an educated customer? Because if that kind of guides the conversation better on both sides. If you've got an educated customer coming in, what are the first 3 questions that you would ask a customer coming in the door to talk to you, to find out what they want, what they're looking for, how they're trying to solve it?
Yeah, so that is what we call the discovery phase. When we talk to a customer, we spend at least, let's say, 15 minutes asking lots of open questions on what issues need to be solved. In fact, that's the first problem we ask, the first question we ask. What are you looking at to solve? And then we do some exploratory stuff in terms of how are you interacting with the staff right now? What do you have in place to do that? How are you interacting with your community or your customers? Are you using paper? I mean, there's still some people using paper, right? So we go through at least 15, 20 minutes just figuring out what issues that need to be solved. And then we can do a quick demo of sort of the quote unquote canned solution, right? And then talk about configuring the right kind of solution for the customer.
Talk to me about time frame. I mean, if someone comes and says, "Hey, look, I am using paper," or I do, I'm starting to grow as a company here, and I'm starting to find that company culture and employee retention is. I don't go to sleep at night because I'm worried that if one of my employees leaves tomorrow, I'm not going to be doing so well. Mm-hmm. They come to you. Is that something that they in 2 weeks that's done? Is it 2 months? What does that look like from kind of first conversation to?
So it depends on the size of the organization, but we've launched solutions in days for smaller organizations. For large organizations like 10,000 plus, it might take a month or something like that. But usually that time is spent dealing with lots of interested parties within the organization. It's not sort of so much the product platform. In fact, it's reasonable to say, I think for us, turning on a customer is pretty much the same, whether it's small or large. Now, there's obviously some more time spent with larger customers because they just have more requirements. But we've tried to build a very flexible system so we can do a lot of things quickly, right? But yeah, I mean, it's either days or a few weeks tops.
Gotcha. And what that means is from when they have that first conversation to where they're starting to, whether it be employees or customers or just internally for other purposes, they're clicking buttons in a few weeks, kind of thing, a few weeks or less.
Yeah, I mean, the concerns we have are things like, well, will people use it? Right? So, like we deployed this COVID tracking solution, and there was some concern. Well, will people use it? Blah blah blah, right? But we had adoption rates of 95% within a few days after it was deployed. It was pretty. I was actually surprised myself, but it was kind of cool to watch that because. I guess my point is it's not so much the end user that's the issue. It's the organization that needs to sort of decide we're going to do this and just push forward, right? And yeah, there's a bit of a learning cycle, but it's not that hard.
So what do you, okay, so that's a pretty big number, right? 95%. What do you think that facilitated that 95% happening? Is it just kind of that discovery process up front and kind of understanding what they needed to solve?
So it depends. Well, there's a lot of different factors on the adoption rate. A key factor, if you look at something like communities and schools, organizations like that, it's how they sort of decide to communicate with that. This is a little hard to explain, but the energy they put into the process, right? That's one factor. Another factor is the information you're sending and asking back from that end user, is it important? Is it relevant? Right? So in the case of COVID tracking, the answer is oh yeah, definitely important for everybody, right? So that was like kind of an easy one for us, frankly, right? But there's other kinds of information we collect that's sort of mandatory information. But the funny thing is that when we look at our customers, you kind of see different tools they're using, and the adoption they have with the current tools that are electronic could be 20, 30%. It's pretty low, right? But they may still be using paper, and the adoption they're getting on paper is 90%. Why is that? Well, paper is carrying very important mandatory information. Now, I'm not saying the businesses would still be using paper, but the content itself does matter as well, right? So that's the second factor. The third is a sort of a broad reach approach. There are lots of parts of the community that are not comfortable in English. It's amazing, we're all comfortable in English, but there's some folks out there that are not, and they're left out in the dark, right? Mm. That's a very simple problem to solve with the tools we have. It's very simple. And in fact, you don't need Wi-Fi at home, right? That was a big sort of question mark a few years ago. Well, do they have Wi-Fi at home so they can do this? You don't need it. All you need is a smartphone. And if you look at the statistics on smartphone adoption, it's pretty high, right? So there's really no excuses not to expect very high adoption rate if you do it right, and if the information is relevant.
And that's part of the process that you'll take them through. And because look, if I'm coming to you as a business owner, I know what my business is. That's not necessarily my strength, talking about the adoption. Because look, if I'm going to spend $5, I want to get $10 out of it, right? Yeah. So getting the adoption, getting the use of it, getting some insights that I can make out of it, you'll guide them through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the metrics, the KPIs, it's going to depend on what we're doing, right? But your question was just straight up on adoption, I think. And for something like COVID tracking or similar types of forms that are being sent out, we can get very high adoption rate.
One last question for you here, and that is vertical specific.
Can I say one more thing real quick?
Yeah, please.
One of the reasons for that is that the solutions we designed there is smartphone. Obviously, it works on a smartphone, and it's we send out a text message, there's a link, click, and they respond. It literally takes them 10 seconds, no more than that. And when they do it the first time, they realize, oh, this is super easy. And now it's done every day in some communities. We send it out 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. and we get this huge flood of responses. And the schools and other community leaders can see what's going on.
Industry or verticals. Is there one industry or vertical that you have? Do you have I guess the question is, can you go across verticals? I mean, industries?
Yeah, we have solutions. It's for schools, as you know. We have solutions for senior living, assisted living. That's a great example of that customization you talked about. It's largely the same, but there's tweaks in the product to support the needs that those kinds of groups have. And now we are introducing solutions for small businesses as well, using largely the same tool set. And we're gonna see how it goes, but I think there's lots of interesting potential.
Well, Ravi, I actually hope everyone got a little bit out of having the opportunity to talk to you and hear you talk about technology and data and sort of how it's this tools that you can pull together and build into custom solutions to address some of those gaps. If someone wants to start just kind of where they are today, what would you kind of give them as step one, step two advice in terms of kind of going down this path? Because lots of times the path could be long and hard. It's just taking the first step or two that is the hardest. Where would you tell someone to start? What would you
look at the current operation and start figuring out the gaps. If it's perfect, it's perfect. And when there's something wrong, if you think it's perfect, because nobody's perfect. But maybe your operation is already very efficient, growing quickly. But in most cases, there's all kinds of gaps. You may have. So I would first do a survey of all the tools you're using. I would also look to see how you're interacting with employees. Are you seeing enough information? Are you collecting enough information? So look at that area. Then also look at on the customer side. Are you collecting enough information on customers, how they're perceiving your business, right? Are you, do you have enough touch points? Are you reaching out to them in the right way, right? So I think sort of a comprehensive survey internally of how you're running, running the organization around employees and customers.
So I'm going to play that back to you, maybe with a little bit of interpretation here. I think I, over time, have become more and more of a gut feel kind of person, right? If I get a gut feel around something, there's something to be inspected. I think what I'm hearing from you is, if you feel like employees is a place where you're having some challenges, if you feel like customers is a place you're having your finance, whatever the case is, right? Wherever you kind of just feel it in your core that there's something that needs to, I need to punch through that ceiling somehow. That might be the place to start investigating and put a process, right?
Yeah, the adage is run to the problem, right? Run towards the problem. So that probably is a very good way to start. Yeah.
And then you can start to investigate it, figure out, start to collect more information that'll start to give you that ground truth. So you can start to, Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? So then you can start to figure out where the problem exists and why, right? Ravi, after this, if anyone's got questions, I would love to take them and kind of direct them to you. I'd like to share your contact information with everyone afterwards. Is that okay to share that on the post and put your information in there?
Absolutely. Yeah, okay. Ravi@zipslip.com.
Ravi@zipslip.com. So I will put that on the post so that anybody who's got any questions can reach out to you directly afterwards and ask further questions, or put comments on the thread after we post it out there. So, Ravi, thanks for taking some time to spend with me and walk us through what you do and kind of how your view of the world. I think everyone can always continue to polish their perspective.
Thank you. Hopefully this was fun and informative. I hope so. I had fun. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's at least the way I am, there's always something more to learn that I'm not looking at. I may be looking at it, but I just forgot to look at it for a little while. So thanks, Ravi. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. See ya.
All right, bye.